Hello everybody, how are you doing? I'm back on Twitch. Last week I wanted to stream the podcast recording, but Twitch wouldn't let anybody stream. Well, a lot of people, me included. And I need to fix things. Well, some things broke with OBS because of the big update. I think I need to go to it can apparently do individual Windows audio sources, but I need some time to figure that out and play with it, and I don't have that time at the moment, so I'm just happy everything works. Hello, Jim. I somewhat miss Sunset Drive, but this new intro also rocks. Yeah, I really, it's more hypey. Sunset Drive was cool as well, but I kind of like the hypey part of it. Anyway, what are we doing? We're recording a podcast today. I'm going to talk about the topic that I've had on my list for quite a while. Months now, but I don't know. I was somewhat lucky because when I prepared to finally do it this week, I was like, what story? So I want to talk about like how fear-based journalism is bad. And then I thought, like, what story am I going to use? And there was the perfect story this week. So it's just a perfect example. So, yeah, I was kind of lucky that way. So let's get into it. Let's do that. Let's arm the tracks. That's the thing we need to do. And zoom in here a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. So because then I won't have to use this fucking voice meter anymore. I can do the audio sources directly. Fix that. That sounds good. Okay. Right. If you're all ready, let's do this. Let's get right into the show. Let's get this done. You're listening to The Private Citizen, a podcast for... Well, certainly fucked that up. Let's do that again. Take 2. You're listening to The Private Citizen, podcast for critical thinkers. This is episode 126 for Wednesday, the 5th of October, 2022. Why? I mean, I could fix it in post, but like, why? This Scourge? Jesus Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Hey, Astro, how you doing? You're just in time for take 3. You're listening to The Private Citizen, podcast for critical thinkers. This is episode 126 for Wednesday, the 5th of October, 2022. The Scourge, fear-based journalism. Hello everybody, my name is Fab. I'm coming to you live from Düsseldorf in Germany. Yes, we're back again on a Wednesday, normal release schedule, and live, recording this and streaming the recording on Twitch, which wasn't possible last week because Twitch wouldn't let me go live, which is a bit of a problem. But I just recorded the show offline and put it out as soon as possible. I kind of want to do that live because that was kind of like, last week was kind of like a almost breaking news topic with the Nord Stream stuff. But anyway, that's the way it goes. I'm back, and today we will talk about a topic that I've had on my list of topics for months now. I want to talk about what I see the biggest problem in journalism. I've talked about journalism on the show before, and I think this is very important and something that actually influences all of our lives more than most people think. Because just to have a little maybe a little teaser for the end of what I'm going to say at the end of the show. I think most people have, or many people think they have a solution for this, which is just not, listening to the media anymore, not consuming any journalism or little of it, which I can understand. I can understand the impetus, but that doesn't solve the problem, because basically the problem is so bad that I think it's. This isn't hyperbole. I think it is destroying our society. And it will do that whether you consume any journalism or not. I'm going to explain today why I think that is. But before we get into the topic at hand, I wanted to mention something that I've done. I get asked, so a lot of the people who listen to the show will know that years ago I used to do a podcast called Linux Outlaws with a friend of mine called Dan Lynch. It was a Linux podcast, and it was very popular, and many people even today tell me they think it was the best Linux podcast there ever was. And I often get asked, where are the old episodes? Well, they are on hard drives. They're on my backups, but they're on very cold storage backups. And people have always asked me, can't you put them online? And people have suggested, of course, the Internet Archive. So I've started doing that now, just because people kept asking me for it, and I kind of feel responsible to do that. So I have started uploading some episodes to the Internet Archive. I've also created a page on my website, fab.industries, where you can, with direct links, you can go there. If you go to the show notes at privatecitizen.press, you will find the show notes to this episode. There will be links to everything I mentioned. But I've also reactivated an old domain that we used to have. That is outlawarchives.com. Outlawarchives.com. If you go there, it's for now it's a simple redirect from my domain hoster, which doesn't support HTTPS. So I'm sorry for that. But if you have to specify HTTP, outlawarchives.com. But if you go there, you get redirected to my website, fab.industries, which is, of course, Fab Industries is fully TLS encrypted. So you get HTTPS there. There are only, I think, 3 episodes on there. Actually, I'd have to check. So far I only uploaded the first 3 episodes. It'll be slow going. I need to dig them out of backups manually and kind of do that in my spare time. So I just wanted to mention, some people still have a nostalgic hankering for those episodes. I listened into the first episode again, and I don't know why. It was early days, man. It was early days. That was 2007. That was quite a while ago. But anyway, some people have asked for it, and so I shall endeavor to get those episodes up there. But with that, I think we should now talk about the topic that I wanted to talk about today, which is fear-based journalism. Okay. That is broken. Why is that broken? Why? Oh, probably this is my fault. Yeah. Okay. So I'll fix that in post. It recorded the intro, didn't it? Yeah, because that gets piped in directly. Okay, that was a setup issue on my part. Let's just pretend that never happened. Yeah, so fear-based journalism. Maybe I should do a quick explainer for people who are new to the show. There are always new people listening, so I guess this would make sense. First off, I should explain that I am a journalist. I'm currently a freelance journalist. I used to work in a publishing company, relatively big publishing company. Well, at the time, it was the biggest magazine, IT magazine in Europe, I think. Probably still is. Might be in the world now with the way, editorial offices are shrinking. And I worked for a smaller publishing company before that. And so I got a little bit experience with how things work. Of course, I've never worked in a big, newspaper or a big magazine, as we call it in Germany, Leitmedien, the mainstream publications. But I have, especially when I lived in Hamburg, I got into quite a few networks, and I know quite a few journalists, and I've visited certainly a lot of offices and editorial companies and stuff like that. So can I go as far as saying I know what I'm talking about? Well, not when it comes to using microphones, obviously, constantly bumping into them. But when it comes to journalism, and I've had about 10 years of experience with this kind of thing now, and I went into journalism in the beginning to make things better. When I decided I would become a journalist, when I left school, I wanted to be a journalist, and then I started study at university, and then I didn't study journalism because I didn't think that was a good idea. I still don't think so. But I very quickly became jaded and thought maybe you want to do something else. And I actually was on my way to do other things, especially, go into computers and stuff. But as life sometimes throws you a curveball, I had an opportunity, and I tried to, I thought, why not? You always wanted to be a journalist, so let's try it. But from the beginning, I went into this as somebody who saw the problems that existed in the industry, so to speak, and I did want to go there to change it. I feel often, for many people that is certainly not for everybody, or maybe not the majority of people, but I think there's a sizable amount of people in any given profession that see things and think, I could do that better. Let me try. And that, that was me. And ever since then, I've had that's been kind of one of my missions. I've been very interested in the matter topics of journalism, and how stories get published, and how the whole media circus, so to speak, works. I've been very interested in that, and that has never changed. So it's one of my pet peeves, certainly. And I've talked about it on the show previously. The show kind of evolved. It started very much as a privacy show, but I feel we have other issues that, while I'm still very interested in those problems, I'm also interested in a lot of political problems these days, because they kind of overshadow everything. If a nuclear war breaks out, who cares about data privacy, really? And I think journalism is the way that journalism works these days is a big contributor and creates or facilitates a lot of the problems we're actually having in our daily lives. And I think that's a shame, because I think generally, certainly I became a journalist to, do the opposite. I became a journalist not because you can earn a lot of money by not working very much, or earn a lot of money anyway, or because it's so fun or so relaxing a job. I became a journalist because I think it's a worthwhile cause. Like the way I see it, if you look at what do you do as a journalist from a very, very high level, your calling, so to speak, I think is to inform people, to give people accurate information, and by that to make their lives better, to uncover things that are not going the way they should in society, to help voters in a democracy make the right choices, and kind of keep politicians on edge, to minimize the problems and the issues that arise when, for example, companies have too much power in a capitalist system, all these kind of things. And I became an IT journalist, and I didn't write about political topics, so I'm just on the fringes of that. But I think a good journalist, no matter what they write about, they might be restaurant critics, they might write about cars or video games, it doesn't matter. I think their goal should be to serve, in my case, their readers, or the listeners, the audience, to serve their audience, right? The audience is their customer, and they should, if they're paying for the content or not, they're paying it for it in some way. That should be their goal, right? And yeah, I just wanted to say that in the beginning, so you know where I'm coming from. Now, when I thought, well, let's finally do this episode about fear-based journalism, which is a straightforward thing. I mean, that's a term that's been used quite a lot. It's not such a media insight thing anymore. I thought, well, we'll have to have like a story or something where I can explain what I'm talking about. And then this week, the perfect story came along. And we'll see what that is in a bit. But maybe before I talk about that, maybe I talk a little bit about what do I mean and what do other people mean when they're talking about fear-based journalism. So I feel that these days, journalists, and I mean this is a generalization, right? There are many of my colleagues who don't do this and who fight against this as much as I do. But I feel, if you look at everybody who's working as a journalist, I think the majority is included when I say this, right? I think journalists these days are less concerned with, is a story true, or finding out as much truth as they can, as much facts about a topic that they write or talk about. But generally, they're rather more interested in how much clicks their story or their podcast or, whatever they do generates. And they have figured out, or middle management in publishing companies has figured out, I think generally also somewhat intuitively, not like, this isn't like a theory somebody came up with and then everybody took seminars and they're like, this is how we can make more money. I think intuitively people figured out that, by figured out, I mean, this generally, people figured this out because of the internet, right? Because of, you can now see exactly what people are reading, but I'll get to that. So they figured out that strong emotions get people to read things, watch things, and that makes a story stick. That makes lots of people read it, click on it, share it with their friends, watch a television, maybe a show or whatever, or a segment, if it evokes emotion, it has reach, right? People will watch it, will read it, and it's pretty clear that the stronger the emotion, the better this works. Now, the strongest emotion of all is fear. I think that's. I'm not a psychologist, and I can't really tell you why, but it's probably an evolutionary thing. Fear is important, right? Fear is useful to us. I actually watched a Star Trek Voyager episode where there's some people Star Trek. Classical Star Trek's great. This was an episode about like some people being stuck in like hibernation pods, and they linked their brain together, and their brain was interfacing with an AI that kind of, it was basically to keep their brains entertained while their bodies were frozen. And turns out that the strongest emotion of all is fear, and this is what manifested. Kind of like in this just occurred to me on the fly, but I think that episode, I need to look that up. I'll put that in the show notes, Private Citizens Not Press. I'm gonna look this up on the fly. Voyager episode, fear, clown. The Thaw. It's called The Thaw. It is Star Trek Voyager Season 2, Episode 23. It's a great episode. So the program kind of manifests fear, and they're stuck there in there with him, and he actually kills some of them, and it's quite a hilarious episode. It looks very much like an original series episode. But anyway, that kind of deals with this. The strongest emotion of all is fear. So if you figure out that emotionally based writing or content gets people to stick with it, then the strongest emotion is the best one. And this is why it's kind of crystallized that fear works. And it's, to get people to read your stuff. And it's kind of like, it's not like journalists sit there with many of this stuff, right? It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not like journalists sit there, how can we make people click on this? They're just like, they write stuff, and then they watch the statistics, and they see, well, this kind of story worked and that kind of story worked. And then it's not like they think, hey, what's the next story that I can scare people with? They're like, okay, this kind of story works. Now this is happening, so we can concentrate on it and put this angle on it, which tends to be a fear-based angle. I don't think a lot of the journalists doing this are actually reflecting on it, which is part of the problem. I mentioned I'm recording this live on Twitch. El Terrestris Jim in chat is saying, I have the feeling that nowadays it is almost impossible not to doom scroll regardless of what media outlet you are reading. It's all war, energy crisis, inflation, corrupt or simply useless politicians, possibly nuclear war. We're going to talk about the possibility of nuclear war in a bit, but yes, I think it's very possible not to doom scroll. I'm not reading much of the news these days. I'm going to talk about the Putin nuclear weapon train story, right? And I talked to my wife earlier, and my wife, for example, hasn't actually heard of the story, even though it's been all over the news for days, because she's just like busy doing science shit, and she just won't waste time on this kind of thing. Which, that is possible. At the end of the show, I'm gonna explain why that is not a solution to the problem as a whole. It is a solution to your personal problem, and it will alleviate a lot of stress in your life. So sometimes you just don't do that. Just resist that urge. They've hooked you in, right? Journalists with this approach have kind of hooked you in. That's the thing about fear. Fear sticks with you, and if they start scaring you about the war in Ukraine, you're like, every morning you wake up, the first thing you do is you go on the news site, like, what's happened now? How bad is it now? Right? And you need to recognize that. And, that's why I'm doing this episode. It's one of the reasons, because I want to enable you to recognize that, and then you can break through that. It's kind of like, any addiction. It's kind of like, it's an addiction. You can get addicted to fear. They actually mentioned this in the Voyager episode as well, where they talk about, fear is good. It has good sides. Like in evolution, it kind of helps you not kill yourself by being careless and stuff like that. And it also, people get addicted to it. This is why people do skydiving and dangerous sports and all this kind of stuff, right? Or as they say in the Voyager episode, holodeck adventures with the safety off. Because, what did they say in that episode? Like, it's pushing you. When you push your boundaries, you kind of push your boundaries of what it means to be human. When you push against the fear, right? So that's also why it's addictive, and you need to recognize that to break the habit, as with every habit. Now, I mean, Jim says these days, and it's always like, this has always been the case. The difference I feel is that a few years ago, if we talked like the 80s, or even the 90s, if you did a print magazine, right, or a newspaper, or a daily TV news show, you had limited responses from the audience. You had people writing in and stuff like that, but like, you couldn't directly tell what story people really the equivalent of clicked on. Like, why did they keep reading your newspaper? Why do they keep tuning in at night? You had like market research, but all of that wasn't as direct. So that actually, I think, made journalism a lot better, because there wasn't this. I'm going to go into how this is not all of this is the fault of journalists, right? It didn't. The problem is that we have now is this creates a pressure from management, right, to do the things that work, which that pressure wasn't there back then because they didn't know that well. And that actually made journalism better, because that actually made them, the journalists do other stories than just doom and gloom. They always, you always knew that worked, and like sex sells and all that kind of stuff. But like, the direct feedback loop wasn't there, so they didn't know how well that worked. So they kind of still balanced it out. Jim says, "Yeah, I simply stopped reading about certain topics." Yeah, I completely myself. I switched to like a pull. Like if we're talking like software development or whatever, UX. I'm working on a pull, not a push notification system, right? I don't want like I go out and I'm like, what happened? And I'll get the push anyway. If something like really important happens, you'll hear about it sooner or later. Like, you don't even have. I haven't watched the daily news on the TV in over 20 years, and it worked really well for me. And I'm not regularly scrolling news sites at all. And I've even stopped using things like Instagram, because it's basically, they put all the shit in there now. So I'm not scrolling Twitter anymore, not in my free time. I'm like, I do that when I research things. And of course I keep up to date on topics and on generally everything, because you kind of have to if you do a podcast like this, for example. But like, I do that on my own time, right? And it takes a lot of the stress out of it. Anyway, but in the new era, journalists with this ability to check in real time exactly what people were doing on their news sites and stuff like that, they figured this out. And so it really started with Trump, I feel, and also with climate change. This is when, like, they really saw how well these doom stories worked and got fooled. I mean, we've seen that before, but that's when it got really bad. And then, of course, the pandemic. And now the topic is obviously the war in Ukraine, which brings us to the story I want to use as an example, which I think in many ways is the perfect example. So earlier this week, we had the story. Actually, was it earlier this week? Was it late last week? Let me just check. This is from the 3rd. No, that's Monday, actually. German Unification Day. So, earlier this week, we had a story which I think got started on the Telegraph, which was a story about Vladimir Putin shipping nuclear weapons on a train through Russia to the Ukraine border to possibly have a nuke test to show the West that he would nuke Western, cities, and to threaten that, which was a bullshit story from the beginning. So actually, the first thing I saw about it, which was, I think, the next morning, was a guy on Twitter called Dr. Jeffrey Lewis, who is he does like his Twitter handle is @armscontrolwonk. So he's kind of, that's this is kind of thing. He's a professor at the Middlebury Institute in California. I've actually never heard of that, but he does a podcast and stuff like that. Anyway, he kind of is in the topic, and he did a relatively good Twitter thread, which is really just common sense, where he explains that this, somebody taking photos and video of like a train with armored vehicles on it could be anything. There were launchers on there that could be used to launch nuclear weapons, but they can also be used to launch normal conventional ballistic missiles, and that's what they usually used for. And he explains that actually, since the Soviet Union, the Russians had like special train cars to transport nukes, and like this whole idea is just ludicrous. I mean, if you just look at it, with common sense, then like that's not how you do a nuclear test, and that's not why you do nuclear tests, and you certainly don't do nuclear tests to show that you can nuke somebody, right? In the Cold War, I guess this is based on the idea that in the Cold War, when the Cold War kicked off, the Americans and the Soviets, kind of battled it out with nuclear tests, but the point there was to show that we have the bigger bomb, right? And then the Soviet Union, very early on, I think this was in the 60s. When was this? I'm going to look this up. Tsar Bomba. Tsar Bomba was... what does it say? Hello? 61. In 61, detonated the biggest nuclear bomb ever. And then that was kind of done. Then we all knew that the bombs are big enough that we can just destroy each other and the whole planet while we do it. So that's not like, what you do or what you could do is move certain nuclear weapons to the border to show that you're ready to nuke another country. But like, this makes no sense when you're talking about Russia. They have ICBMs in silos, right? It's an ICBM. If they want to nuke Berlin, they can do it from Moscow. There's silos outside of Moscow. We know this from the Cold War. You know this if you watched fucking Dr. Strangelove, right? This is like the reason why this story is so bad and such a good example for this kind of thing is that it's such a bad story. You don't even have to be an expert in the subject matter to understand A, that this train could be anything, just looking at it, and B, the whole premise makes no sense, right? If Putin wanted to escalate and show that he'd go like to a nuclear silo, and he'd do like one of these where they do press tours, right? Like Kim Jong-un, when he goes somewhere and just like, oh, this is our shit, and this is our new nuclear bomb, and look, I'm taking a photo with my nuclear. This is how you do it, right? You go like, oh yeah, Putin inspects readiness, nuclear launch control in, I don't know, wherever, Krasnodar. This is such a dumb story. It is a very dumb story. It was immediately debunked by people who know what they're doing. Nonetheless, it was copied by media outlets all over the globe. I have a few links if you go to Private Citizen Press. Got a few links in the show notes. So, first story, the Telegraph: nuclear weapons convoy sparks fears Putin could be preparing to send signal to the West. The Times: Putin, quote, orders nuclear military train to Ukraine, end quote. Why is that in quotes? How do they know Putin ordered it? Vox: the Russian nuclear threat explained. The New Statesman: what could happen if Russia used nuclear weapons? And then the Telegraph doubles down with a column: it's time to call Putin's bluff. That's just, I write a column in a daily newspaper once a week, and people complain when I go, oh, maybe paying everything digitally isn't the best of ideas. then they complain bitterly. This guy writes a column where he basically tries to escalate nuclear war. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. So that's the situation. That's what we're in today. Somebody in Russia films a train. The international press goes, "Oh, this might be nuclear weapons. This is Putin. Putin wants to detonate nukes in Ukraine. Let's all run with it." And it takes days for the first articles to go. Journalists to think and go like, maybe this doesn't really make sense, this story, right? Why is this? And I mean, this is a classic fear-based journalism story, right? If you write a story, we're in the middle of an escalating war in Ukraine, and you write a story that basically says, hey, Putin is shipping nuclear weapons to Ukraine, we're all gonna die, is the implication. Then people will click on that. Of course they click on that. They don't want to die. This sounds horrible. So this kind of story works. Of course it does. But why? Why is it happening? I've tried to figure out what's going on, and I've categorized it into two problem areas. And the first one, I think, is not the fault of the journalists, and I think this is the bigger one. It all starts with there in news organizations, there are big horrendous pressures to save money. This is because in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, or even before that, people who owned newspapers, so they basically, the people who owned a publishing company, right, they owned the newspaper, so they owned the few printing presses, which were hugely expensive. So they were one of the few people who could print shit at a publication level where you'd reach a whole country or the whole world. There were the people running television stations. They owned a spectrum, right? They were the only ones who could put a TV show on the air or radio on the air. And because of that, there wasn't that much competition. And because journalism is a worthwhile endeavor that people are interested in. And I believe in journalism, right? I believe strongly. I've always believed that, against a lot of people at places where I work to telling me otherwise. I believe journalism will always be there. To get informed is just one of the humans are a society animal, right? And that's one of the things that goes with that. So I think that will never go away. But things are changing, of course, always changing. And they used to make a lot of money, and then the internet came along and enabled anybody to do this, including me, just do a podcast. I'm doing right now what reaching thousands of people. To do that, 30 years ago, you needed a radio station. To do the exact thing that I'm doing 30 years ago, you need a radio station. Now everybody can do that. That means the advertising isn't there, whatever means of financing your shit you have, the profit margin took a nosedive. And the people that own these kind of companies, they still want to make that kind of money that they made in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So to rescue their profit margin, there's a pressure to save money. The journalists are fired. The journalists are still there, are paid shittily. Everybody's paid shittily, like the graphic designers, everybody. And they have a lot more pressure to do the same or more work in much less time, which leads to people not researching anything. It used to, when I was still working at a publishing company, it used to be that people didn't have the time to research anything. Now, I don't think they have the time to think. So the Telegraph goes, Putin sending nuclear bombs to Ukraine. And the poor guy working at, the Times doesn't even have the fucking time and is not allowed by his boss. I mean, let's not talk about research that shit. He can't even think clearly about that shit. He's just immediately rewording that news story and maybe calling somebody for pro forma So we did some research, and then they just put the fucking story out, and it gets worse and worse. That's not the journalist's fault, though, right? They're just the poor workers that get kicked in the ass from their boss. Astral C says in Twitch chat, this is some of the reasons I can't stand push news, never corrected original articles, breaking news, not evolving story integrity for the news side. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the situations. I worked at a very good publishing company, right? And the company I worked for was probably the best you could work for. And all of that, what I'm talking about today, was the least in effect over there. But even there, because I wanted to make journalism better, I was constantly arguing with people that had something, leading editors and editors-in-chief. And I was going like, for example, we had an app and we started to do push news. And I'm saying like, you push, this is supposed to be like a breaking news channel. You're pushing too much into that shit. Sorry, I'm getting agitated. I'm waving my hands around. You're pushing too much into, this story is not breaking news. When we launched that app, because I was doing a lot of online, I was working for the website, and the website launched that app. I installed it, not because I needed it, because I needed everything we were writing about. I knew everything we were writing about, just to dog food, right? To see what we were doing. And I had to uninstall it after I think 2 weeks. I couldn't take it anymore. It was pushing too much news in my direction. I was like, you can't do this. This is too much. And none of this is breaking news, right? In the field we were working at, there were maybe 2 breaking news stories a week that I would classify as breaking news. And we were pushing 5 stories a day or something or more. It was bad. Yes, Astro sees also comments, which is also true these times. They often don't even have the time for rewording. They're just copying it. Or have some AI in air quotes copy it or something. I don't know what they do these days, but yeah, it's gotten to a point where it's truly horrible. A lot of the fault of this lies with the audience. With the internet, you started to see an audience that is largely unwilling to pay for content. Right, where it was normal if you had a daily newspaper, you paid for the newspaper, and then the company also made money by ads and classified ads and all that. The not only did the ads go away on the internet largely because of companies like Google and market pressure and shit like that. No, people are also not willing to pay. And that's a problem. And I don't think I really have to explain to you why, because you get what you pay for, right? This is a problem. This causes this crush that causes these kind of pressures on the journalists, which is why their work is shit. And surprising, if you outsource every, if you look at, for example, I think shoes are a good example. If you look at shoes, right, and what kind of qualities shoes had, in the 60s, for example, or the 70s. If you outsource this production to another country and you pay people like 1% of what they used to get, your product becomes shit to a point where these days you almost can't buy shoes that last. And we've just accepted this kind of with journalism. We just accept, I'll just buy new shoes every year. And it's starting with cars now. It's horrible. I bought some shoes now 2 years ago that I'm very happy with. If you're into shoes, they're called Red Wing shoes. They're from the US. They're handmade. They're 3 times as expensive as a comparable pair of shoes. But they're quality. Even this, I've been walking on them for the better part of 3 years, and the sole is not, the sole on the heel isn't even worn down enough for me to get that replaced. Usually that happens after a summer or a winter, if you have winter shoes, right? Of one season, I have to do that sometimes earlier. This kind of, that's what happens. If you do that, if you make the whole process cheaper and cheaper, your product gets shit. The same thing happened with journalism. Then, because these journalists are not paid well, their editorial offices don't have a big budget, stuff like that. And we now have a situation where the PR agencies, so the people doing PR, which is also includes propaganda if they work for the government, they have much more resources than the journalists they supply with information, which, resources are power. So this creates kind of like a power gradient where like the PR people have more power than the journalists they feed information to, which means the journalists they can't, like, the PR people can just feed them shit, and the journalists have no way of like fighting that. They don't have time, they don't have money, they can't do the work they need to do to check the shit. So they just get shit from PR companies. This is why the press largely now just regurgitate things that companies tell them, right? Or the government, right? It's they don't have the time or the money to like fact check, as you would say today, or as I used to say, research things, right? So it's everywhere. Like in the IT field, you get NVIDIA pushes out a press release, and everybody just reports that. They don't check, this card is so much faster than the old one. They don't have time to check. The government says, well, this works. This fights COVID. People don't check. They don't read scientific papers. They don't have time for that. So this power gradient is probably the worst. I mean, aside from just the working conditions of journalists, this power gradient is what destroys good work in this field. And then you also have an aspect that I think this is something that just occurred to me over, the last few years, or maybe a year or two maybe. I think our lives, we also have more pressures in our daily lives. Our lives just gotten more and more complex. There's more and more information just coming in. And I think this leads to audiences that are so caught up in their daily lives that they just don't critically evaluate anything anymore. And I'm talking like products, everything, but also news stories, right? They don't think critically anymore. And you've always had that. Like certain people never did that. Like the normal, I'm just a working stiff people. They just basically believed. It used to be like this thing, you'd like almost a stereotype where like, okay, these are poor, like dumb people. They'll just believe what the rainbow press tells them. But this is now prevalent everywhere. We're talking C-level executives of companies just believing what the, as we say in German, the Leitmedien, the mainstream media says, because it's the mainstream media. And then they also don't have time to check and don't have time to think. And if you listen to this podcast regularly, this is kind of where the opposite team lives, right? We're the guys, that's what I'm trying to do here. We're the guys trying to think about things. We go like, this story doesn't make any sense. The majority of people reads this nuclear train story and goes, oh my God, I'm afraid. Or like, oh shit. They don't go, this story doesn't make any sense, right? Even if you assume Putin is evil, this doesn't make any sense. Like the only thing you need to do is like think back to the Cold War, because the situation right now is basically the situation that existed at the beginning of the Cold War, right? So you don't even have to be that old. You just have to have some level of education. You have to, if you went to school, they probably told you about this kind of thing. And you're like, this is not how it worked in the Cold War. They weren't like shipping trains around. And so the situation hasn't changed. So this doesn't make it like, I mean, it's a completely different situation, but some things just haven't changed. This is not how it works. This story doesn't make any sense. Right? And it's not even, I don't even expect anybody to take that leap and go, shit, they just want to scare me. And just that thinking about things, this doesn't happen anymore. And that's not the journalist's fault. But what that leads to is that when journalists write stories like this, they don't get massive backlash. They also don't get massive backlash for reasons that are the journalist's fault, which we get to later. But like that's one of the problems, right? There's no penalties for getting things wrong. They don't even feel bad anymore. Like I used to feel bad. Like I don't want journalists to get fired. You make mistakes. You do wrong research. You don't do enough research. You just like sometimes you just get a story out and you didn't really, your brain wasn't on. It happens to everybody. That's not a problem. But like I wrote in an area where there were very specific nerds or I still do, that read my shit, and they will tell me, I'm wrong. And I've always embraced this. I think this is important to keep you real as a journalist. You have to have that feedback. And that makes you feel bad. You're like, shit, I fucked up. And then you have to admit. The important thing is you have to admit that you fucked up. I'm going into German now. You fucked up. And you have to go, yeah, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. But I feel bad about that. And I don't see that anymore with most journalists. They don't even feel bad. So there's not even that incentive to just check yourself and do things better the next time. That's not there anymore. Then of course, I originally put this into this is the journalist's fault, but it isn't actually. I think there's a general. I've talked about this before. I did an episode on the scientific method, and I talked about science before on the show. But like, most journalism. God, I can't. I'm sorry. It's been a long day, but maybe I just need a drink of water or something here. Got some nice sparkling mineral water from my hometown of Duisburg. Maybe that'll get my brain going. Well, most journalists don't know how science works. And I don't think it's their fault. I think that is, if a lot of these people went to university, and unlike me, a lot of these people actually finished university. So if they went to university, got a degree, and don't know how science works, I think that's a problem of the education system, not the journalists. But it is a problem, because it means they can't do their job. Because if you don't know how science works on a very fundamental level, and we're talking about understanding that anything in science is a hypothesis that at any point can get disproved, and there's no I believe or I believe in science. If somebody says that, they don't know how science works. Or if somebody says it's science, no, that doesn't mean anything. Anything is just a theory. And it's very, very seldom the case in actual scientific work that you can prove it beyond any doubt. And always somebody comes along and says, well, it's like this. So you have to be flexible in your brain, and you have to understand that everything that is currently scientific consensus could change. And that means you can't just go and say, well, that's the be-all, end-all. You have to basically ask questions all the time. I'm actually going to do a podcast on this. And this is another topic I've had on my list. How to do that correctly, right? How to always ask the next question, so to speak. But like, that's not a journalist-specific problem. I think most people these days, there's scientists. I know scientists who don't know how this works, which is scary. But like, it's a big problem if you're a journalist these days, because we're a professed science-based rational culture. So our go-to argument is always, well, the science says this. But if you don't understand how the science works, then you can't do journalism. Also, doing proper journalism is kind of like science. That's how you do it. Like you arrive at a conclusion, and then you say, well, this is the conclusion we arrived at. But the point is, you're never that sure. You never go like, oh, this is definitely how it works, right? You always have to qualify that. Either this is like how we think it works, or this is what experts tell us, or this is my opinion. But that always means it's not an absolute fact. And too many journalists these days think there is such a thing as absolute facts, which I did an episode on. Well, you can find all that on Private Citizen Press. Anyway, that's a big problem. And then the last one is an obvious one. This is also a fault of the internet and social media and all this kind of stuff. It's gotten so easy to just descend into your own filter bubble, right? To surround yourself with the same people, people from your profession, people who think like you, because like that's natural. That's the people you gravitate to, right? And for most people, this happens to everybody. And this happens in all kinds of professions. And this can lead to problems, if you're like, I don't know, a woodworker, and you're like in this woodworking Instagram group, and everybody does the thing a certain way. It doesn't mean that's the best thing. But, for normal people in air quotes, for the majority of people, these kind of filter bubbles are not a problem that threatens their ability to do their job. For journalism, it does. Because journalists they basically make their living from being well informed and from their ability to get information, all kinds of information. And if you're in a filter bubble, you lose that. It's very obvious if you're a political journalist and you're just in your political bubble, then you will never get exposed to other ideas. But it's kind of obvious everywhere now. Journalists lose the connection to a large part of their audience because, they're not in their field. With the pandemic, it was obvious, right? It was obvious that almost all journalists were in a kind of bubble where they thought, or where people, the predominant opinion was, these measures that our government is doing are okay and the right thing to do. And there was at least there was a sizable segment of the population that was at least as big as this bubble, maybe even bigger. Depends on the country. But it was at least 50-50 that thought, no, this is not true. But you could see journalists for years fall into the trap where they thought that the other group of people is a crazy minority, which was obviously not the case. You just had to go outside, stand in the line at the supermarket, and I don't get out much. I'm a fucking freelance journalist writing about IT shit. But even whenever I do this a lot, sometimes I just go to a cafe and just sit there, not even to work. I just listen to people. And I try to listen to all kinds of people. I try to go to bars or whatever, pubs, where there's people from different social strata than me, and I just want to know what they talk about, right? That I can't get on Twitter because it gets fucking filtered out of my algorithm on Twitter, or on Facebook or whatever, on Instagram, TikTok, which is probably much worse, right? So you can live in these kind of bubbles, but if it's your job to see all sides of an issue, this is like death to you. And this is where we cross over into what's actually the journalist's fault. And I think not understanding that living in a filter bubble like this is detrimental to your job is definitely a fault that many journalists have. It used to be, you used to get taught, probably at journalism school as well, that you need to actively seek out dissenting voices, right? And now it's just nobody does that anymore. And it's I've seen that so often. I've seen that at places where I worked. I've seen that visiting other places, working with other people, talking to other journalists. In many aspects. We're talking Trump getting elected in the US. We're talking the pandemic. People who the war in Ukraine now. People who so strongly believe a certain the mind-blowing thing is not let's say we're talking about before the Trump's election, right? Let's say we're talking about if Trump will get elected or not. The mind-blowing thing is not that that I'm talking to somebody who thought there was no chance in hell that Trump would get elected. They were so convinced of that. That's not even the problem. The problem is that if I tell them, well, this is my opinion, this is where I'm coming from, they think I'm fucking crazy, right? Even though it's just in Trump's case, it turned out in this case that I was right, but that's not the point. The point is that they're in a mindset where they're so convinced that they are right and that their opinion is the one all and all, then anybody who has another opinion is crazy. even though it's a valid opinion, right? These days, it's somebody says, well, the Russians obviously losing in Ukraine and got no chance. And I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. Then like, you're fucking crazy. Like, that could be right. I mean, I'm not saying I know everything. The Russians could be losing their ass. Could be right. But like, I accept that their opinion is a valid opinion. I see where they're coming from, and I respect those arguments. I'm just saying I don't think that's right. But I'm like, I know where you're coming from. And I'm not saying, well, you are obviously dumb and crazy. And that very like this, it's not only like living in a filter bubble and not recognizing how that's the worst thing you could do if a journalist is going so all into the filter bubble that even the idea that somebody could be of another opinion is just like, your brain just can't handle it. That is just, that, I mean, and I've met people who are like that, and they're intelligent people, and they're generally nice people. But they're just like, I'm sorry, they should have another job. They should do anything but not be a journalist, because they're obviously not journalist material, what I think. And then, another thing is we currently have a situation where, like, basically we have a political climate that is, one could always say, designed to, like, divide society. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And it's also a climate where, like, a huge part of the citizenry, and no matter what country you're listening to right now, chances are wherever you are, this is the case to some degree, and on different topics, but where you are, right? There's a topic, and then there's the mainstream opinion, and then the other people are just like silenced, right? Or they're just not listened to. Like, how could you even have that opinion? And it used to be that journalists saw their job as fighting this. Right, fighting a divided society like this, especially after the experience. In Germany, it was very clear after the experience in the Third Reich with the press. It was very clear to the journalists in the new formed Federal Republic what that kind of climate does to a society, and that we need to fight it tooth and nail. But these days, journalists even seem to promote this kind of behavior, which is ludicrous to me. Like, they're actively trying to divide people instead of calling out how this happening is not good. And something that's mixed up with all of this, which I think is a definite problem, is just like people, and I've known people like this, who are journalists who consider themselves activists, and you have this like rise of activism within newsrooms, basically, which is even like being taught at J schools now, where it's like, there's some people have the idea that to be a journalist today, you need to be an activist, which is idiotic. I mean, I'm not even a member of a political party. I think if you're a journalist and you're a member of a political party, you're doing it wrong. And the definition of an activist is that that you believe in a cause and you do everything to see this cause succeed, right? You decide that, I don't know, animal welfare is important, or human rights, or the overthrow of capitalism, or the overthrow of socialism. It doesn't matter. And then you kind of, to a more or less extent, devote your life to that. But like, the idea is that you are convinced of that, and that you're not, like, an activist is not actively checking themselves if what they're doing is right. That's not the point of being an activist. The way you become an activist is you realize that there's a certain issue, you become convinced of a solution of the issue, and then you become an activist. A journalist can never go past the first step. You can realize that there's an issue, and you can write about it. You can think that the issue is important, but as a journalist, yes, you can even You can cross over with an activist when an activist is trying to we do our best to inform people of this issue, right? And I mean, it can be something completely harmless. Let's say we're talking about gay rights. And let's say you become an activist for that, and you're it's important that the society realizes that this issue exists and needs to be aware of this, and we need to fight people who are bigoted against gay people. That is something, me as a journalist, I completely agree with. I agree with all of that. But if a story comes up, I can be sympathetic with that cause, but I need to look at that story critically anyway. But that's not what an activist does. An activist never looks critically at anything. That's not the point. I mean, they can also, but as a journalist, you can never, it's kind of I've never understood how some people can be scientists and be religious. I've honestly been wrestling with this issue for 20 years, ever since before I went to university. But for 20 years, I've been thinking about this. How can somebody's brain work in a way where they go, well, I'm a scientist, so my mission in life is to always critically ask questions and try to further human knowledge. And if a question is answered, then I proceed to the next one. And I can never accept that there's no answer. Right? There might be no answer, there might be no way for me to get to that answer. But the very nature of a scientist is to never accept, there's a question, I want to answer it. As a scientist, you never go, there's no answer. I can't get this answer. I give up, basically. That's not how a scientist works. Now, if you're religious, you've accepted that you believe certain things that you cannot prove. Right? That's not something I want to have in my life, but, I respect people who are religious. I don't mind, as long as they don't go, convincing me or other people that what they're doing is great. I don't care. They can do whatever they want. But I don't understand how in one part of your brain you can go, oh, I have to ask everything. I have to always push for the next question, for the answer. And I have to, if there's a question we can't answer, we have to invent the fucking thing to get the answer, right? The people who went, hey, I need to see this under a microscope, but I can't see it under a microscope. They didn't say, oh, I'll give up. I'll just, from now on, I believe that the cell looks like that, or that this molecule looks like that. No, they went and fucking invented the electron microscope. But in religion, you, by definition, have you have accepted, at least, the religions that I've studied somewhat, Christianity being one, you have accepted that there are no answers to certain questions, and then you just believe something. That is so blatantly unscientific, which doesn't matter. If you're just a private person, I don't give a damn. But if you're a scientist, how do you get those two things in your brain at the same time without your brain liquefying and flowing out through your ears? I've never understood this. Terrestrial says, yeah, I also never understood how religious scientists exist. I don't understand that. And then the same way with journalists and activists. And it's not like I don't like those people. I know people who are journalists, who consider themselves activists. And what they're doing, they have good intentions. Right? They have good intentions, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. The one thing you're doing completely corrupts the other thing, and I don't understand why you don't realize that. And I don't understand why. Right? Okay. With the religious thing, you might be religious, you might have been born religious, and now you went and become a scientist, and you're a great scientist, and you do great work. Okay. I still don't understand how you can. What mental gymnastics you're doing in your head to still be religious, but more power to you. You can kind of do that. It works, right? Let's say you you're religious and you believe in God and you're a Christian or whatever, and you do I don't know what doesn't interact with, you do math or whatever, like that works. Like that's you're not gonna mathematically disprove that God doesn't exist, so there's no conflict potential there. But like as a journalist and as a activist, like the only way there would be no conflict potential is if like your activism was in an area that was so far removed from, like, let's say you're I can't even find an example. Let's say you're gay rights activist. Like what part of, like, they shoehorn that in every kind of, I don't know. I didn't even know that works. Like, and all the people I know who are journalists and could consider themselves activists, they write about the stuff they're activists about, which you can tell in their fucking writing. I mean, I talked about how journalism works previously on the show, and that everybody's biased, and you just can't be not biased. And the way you grew up informs how you work, which is why I did that one episode once where I explained all about my childhood and where I come from. But like you can kind of minimize it, right? That's what you're trying to do. You kind of try to be aware of your biases, but these people are completely not aware of their biases. Otherwise, how can they be right about the stuff that they're activists about, right? Let's give you an example. Let's say you're a climate change activist and you're a journalist, you're writing about politics and climate change comes up. As a journalist, to be a good journalist, you have to be critical. Even if you personally think that, climate change is completely proven, there's no argument whatsoever about anything of this, you kind of have to critically ask that every time it comes up in a story, right? You can't just accept things just because they're in a scientific paper. And if you're an activist, you would think that doing so would actually do harm because everybody needs to fucking know about this climate change thing very soon, as soon as possible. And then, we need to do things and change things. Like, you're like, if you're an activist and you're a journalist, you're like the worst journalist there could ever be. It's like you're vegan and you're a butcher. Like it just doesn't compute. It just doesn't work. You just can't. Jim is obviously a scientist. Says I always had to refrain from making fun of them because I had to work in the same lab. Yeah. It's kind of like, I mean, it kind of works. Their mental gymnastics. I mean, you're a biologist. You obviously have to kind of accept that evolution is a thing. So I think like in Germany, you could be like a Protestant, right? So they wouldn't like even the Catholic Church, he doesn't actively say that they think that evolution doesn't exist, even though they say that everything that is in the Bible is true, and the Bible quite obviously contradicts evolution. Just before I move on, the most amazing discussion I ever had with a scientist. This was a biologist who was religious, and we actually had a discussion about religion, and they were making fun about the church in the US, when they have like, intelligent design or whatever it is, when you basically go, well, evolution really, it's not really evolution, it's God, right? God made all of this. And he was like the German, he or she. I actually think it was a woman, but I don't even remember in which, it doesn't matter. Anyway, let's say she actually said, you made fun of this. And I said, but like, you're religious. Like how, I don't understand in the first place how you can believe in God and then also like accept evolution. But then you're making fun about the other religious people who actually take the stuff that's in the Bible seriously, which you actually should do because I don't even, like, my brain just doesn't, I just want to shout and bang my head into the wall. Like, humanity is so weird sometimes. Oh yeah, now we're talking about the agnostic thing again. That Jim says, as a scientist, you have to be agnostic because you can't scientifically prove that God does not exist. But that is the only reason not to be an atheist. Well, I would say, as somebody who's been in historic science for a little bit, there's other reasons. Like, you could just objectively look at human history and the recorded part of human history, and then you can see how much damage religion has done. And I'm always at parties. I'm a hoot. I'm always up for arguing that it was actually the most destructive force. Religion's the most destructive force in human history. But that's arguably, and we don't want to. I don't want to talk about. I talked. Actually, we had a discussion about this at some point. I remember. But there's a feedback episode coming up. Private Citizen of Press. I'm gonna, at the end of the show, I'm gonna explain how to send me feedback as well. Well, just go to that website. Go there. Click on contact. You can contact me in various ways. We can discuss this on the forum, and I'm happy to discuss this in a feedback episode. But let's move on. So activism. I don't get journalists that are activists. Then there is the problem that a large number of journalists these days seem to not understand that PR, public relations, which is another word for propaganda, referencing Edward Bernaysi once again. So that PR is your biggest enemy and not your friend. And I think this is I blame this not on the education system, I blame this on journalists, right? Because this is like veteran journalists, probably because they're all fired, not educating younger journalists and basically training a new generation of journalists. And then this leads to people just thinking, yeah, well, if they really think that they can take a PR, a company releases a product and then give out a press release, and you just write that as news, and they think that that's acceptable journalism, right? Instead of maybe asking questions about that product and the light in which the company presents it, right? Which is PR by definition is the best possible light, which is not going to be reality. So, you're not doing your job. And I've literally, I never had formal journalism training, but I went to quite a lot of journalism, like education. And I've literally, and I'm not joking, I've learned more about this from novels by Terry Pratchett, who used to be a journalist. But like, that's not like he writes only about that. But read The Truth, one of my favorite novels of all time. That book teaches you more about journalism than any J school, basically. He teaches you this, among other things, that the PR person, the person working at the PR agency. And I know some of these people, so this is not meant personally, or the people working in the propaganda department of the government, which is the same thing. That a lot of the times now it's the same PR agency. They're the enemy, as far as I'm concerned. They're my enemy. Their job is to get a message out into the public, and my job is to fact check, as they say these days, that message. Right? My job is to figure out where they're, lying. Maybe massaging the truth, because no fucking press release is reality, and we all know this. You wouldn't argue that, right? Even the people in the PR agencies wouldn't argue that. So why don't journalists these days understand? Like, the problem is twofold. There's the problem that I said, they don't have time to check, but the problem is even bigger because a lot of young journalists these days, they don't even understand that. That's why I always say PR is propaganda, and they laugh. These people laugh. And I'm like, no, it actually is. The guy who invented both wrote a book about it. What? Seriously? Yes, the book's from 1926. Maybe it's time you read it. Yeah. It's unbelievable. And then there's stuff like this is a new development, but that I very much blame on journalists, where they actively, it started with just disregarding parts of their audience. Now they're actively hounding them. So, things like Trump voters are all racist, which was in actual news stories. Gamers are dead. If you protest COVID measures, you are a Nazi, or implied, probably not a Nazi, but like a white supremacist. All of this is stuff that happened, that was in news stories. Some of this verbatim, the gamers are dead thing was a headline. It's like basically you're a games journalist and you're actively alienating a large part of your audience. You're a shit journalist. That's like you work in customer relations in a company, and you go, somebody rings you up, you're in customer support, somebody rings you up and says, I have a problem with my computer, and you say, you're a dumb shit, and you hang up. Like, that's the journalism equivalent of that. You're not doing your job. You can be of the opinion that a large part of your audience is dumb idiots, and I actually would argue you're hard-pressed to find the journalist who doesn't think that. But your job is to, for better or worse, educate them, to inform them. Like, there are still the other people. And maybe if you do some really good writing, you can convince some of the people you really don't like. But like to actively just exclude them and even like say, well, they're bad people and they're, it's just like, it's like, that's like being a car mechanic and saying, well, I hate drivers. They're all shit. Like I constantly have to repair cars because people are too dumb to use their fucking car. They can't like use the clutch correctly. They constantly run into other people. They are dumb. They can't drive. And that would be true. But then you go, okay, so now I will just manipulate their brakes. So when they leave the lot, they just die on their way home. And then I've solved a little bit of that problem. That's, you'd be a very bad car mechanic. And these journalists are very bad journalists for that very reason. And then just the last point is something I'm seeing more and more as well, which is, there's a lot of censorship these days. And it used to be that there were people, usually in the government, in power, that were demanding censorship. And journalists, it was always the main focus of any journalist to fight censorship, because with censorship, you can't do your job as a journalist, right? So you have an inherent vested interest to be against censorship because it prevents you from doing your job correctly. But these days, you get journalists who actually advocate censorship because they would like people outside of their bubble or whatever to get censored. And how can you be a journalist? That's like, I don't know. That's like your job is to fucking cut meat in a meat packing plant, and you're like actively lobbying for it to be outlawed to eat meat. Like, why are you even a journalist? Why didn't you quit your job? Why didn't you do something else? Like, you're a saboteur at best. Why didn't you become a guerrilla fighter? I really don't get that. I don't get these people, and I've talked to these people as well, and they don't even realize what they're doing. And like, yeah, the thing these days seems to be that journalism is okay if it happens to your enemy. No, censorship is okay if it happens to your enemy. That seems to be the consensus these days, which is bad for our society. But like, if anything, the journalists should be. I just don't understand. I don't understand these people. I really don't. I don't understand where their understanding of their job comes from and what they think a journalist should do. And this gives a picture that I would broadly, if I had to analyze the last, 250 years of journalism, I would do it this way. So in the 19th century, it was assumed, we're talking, stuff I did in university, we're talking like Bismarck's time, like, in the 1850s. It was accepted that journalists were biased, inherently biased, and that was just the thing. And it was clear that they're beholden to a certain political view. And we're talking about the time when newspapers were generally owned by political parties, right? Bismarck, who was a politician, had his own newspaper where he would write things, and he would employ people to write things from his point of view. But that was kind of okay because everybody did it, right? That if you weren't conservative, there was like a labor newspaper, and it kind of balanced itself out, and at least you knew where you were at, because you knew the guy writing in Bismarck's newspaper was probably of the same opinion than, Bismarck, who was in parliament or whatever. And then the 20th century rolled around, and then journalists tried to aspire to objectivity, right? Especially in the wake of World War II and the Nazis. It was understood by people who know what they were doing, and thinking about that. Of course, you can never be completely objective as a human being, but you can try, right? And the fact that every journalist had their different worldview and their filter bubble to a certain extent, even back then, and their opinion, and they couldn't completely divorce that and be completely objective, was also compensated by still having a diversity in the market, right? So you had left-leaning newspapers, you had right-leaning newspapers, you had center newspapers, you had conservative newspapers, you had progressive newspapers. And so everybody could just read, normal people could just read, the citizen could just read a lot of things and then just build their own worldview, build their own view of the world from those disparate sources. But with all the factors that I talked about earlier, now in the 21st century, what we seem to have is first a shrinking competition in the market. We have countries where pretty much any mainstream media outlet is of more or less leaning to one side politically, and so you don't have the variation, and then you have the situation where anyone who disagrees with that significantly is just cancelled or silenced, right? If you work at a newspaper and it's relatively progressive leaning and you are somewhat conservative and you try to push like your conservative ideas in, then you'll just get, you won't be able to publish that stuff. And it used to be like that. Now it's actually like the newspaper saying, well, if you're conservative in this political climate, you're basically a Nazi. That's a bit of hyperbole, but that's where it's going. We live in a time where games journalists, right, who have nothing to do with politics, it's like being a fucking restaurant critic. Everybody's political. I understand this, why this podcast turned into a political podcast. I understand that. But you couldn't be further away from politics, right? And then as a games journalist, you develop this opinion that, I don't know, LGBTQPIA, whatever rights are very important, which, fair enough. That's a cause I understand, and to a certain degree I can get behind that. And, maybe that was putting it the wrong way. Sorry. I agree with a lot of that. But when you then put that into your writing and you make it sound like, okay, this is the most important thing about video games right now, right, is like LGBTQ rights, not the fact that major games companies are like ripping off their customers. They're pushing out games that are buggy, that are shitty quality. They're putting in like gambling loot boxes to fucking ruin kids. None of that consumer protection stuff is important. LGBTQ rights is most important. And then you get backlash from your readers who go like, we don't disagree with that. And then you publish stories like gamers are dead. That's just like, what the fuck? You completely do not understand what your job is. I mean, I'm not telling any journalist to shut up about any topic. That's, that would be the antithesis of what I just said the whole time. But I don't want to silence anybody, but you got to understand, somebody at that fucking publication needs to rein it down. Somebody rein it in. Somebody needs to say, look, guys, it's good that you're setting up for this topic, which is important, but really we should get back to our core topic here and, maybe write a little bit more about the Linux kernel in our Linux kernel magazine, and less about the gender of some open source, maintainers. Like it's a topic. Might be an important topic, but also we have other stuff to write about. Like, let's keep it real. Like, that's the only thing I want. That's the only, just be a little bit reasonable. But it just escalates in all directions, and certain opinions are just not heard anymore, and there are they're not heard about in your publication, and then if they can come up another way, people actively derided in stories as I don't know, bad people, and the only crime they have committed is that they have another opinion, right? Like, it used to be when you were a journalist, especially in Germany. This is how I still work because I'm very old school. When you write about a crime story and somebody is convicted of a crime, until they're actually indicted, and there's been a lawsuit, and the lawsuit's finally over, or the appeal is over, and this person is actually convicted, until that point, you would always write in a story hypothetically about them being the murderer or whatever, right? You give them the benefit of the doubt. Right? You'd give a murderer the benefit of the doubt until the state finally declared they're a murderer. And even then, you wouldn't name them because, we assume in Germany, that people can be rehabilitated. That's why we don't execute them, and we generally don't put them in jail for life, So, you do that with a murderer, right? But these days, we're in a climate where journalists, there's an unprecedented, and I've talked about this on the show, there's an unprecedented law being rushed through the, in air quotes, democratic system, that we're all going to die of this virus unless all these, personal freedoms get curtailed. And then people do what in politics class in high school they tell you to do. If you voted for a government and they do something that you think is completely wrong, like this, case in point, then the thing you can do is you can gather in front of the Houses of Parliament, and you can protest that peacefully, yes, but you can make your voice heard. And then people do that, and the press goes, well, these are all nutcases because there's one guy there who's in the neo-Nazi party or whatever. And you're like, what happened to giving people the benefit of the doubt? I mean, these people haven't even murdered anybody. They're just on the road shouting, "Hey, our freedoms are important. It says so in the Constitution." And you're basically publicly shaming them and calling them basically putting them in the same camp with neo-Nazis, because they also happen to be neo-Nazis at the what? How did we get here? And why are journalists driving this? I don't know. But now I'm going to explain to you why this is worse than you think. I mean, we discussed this in chat already. Got some live feedback, which is great. There's an approach for yourself, right? You can go, this is shit journalism, I'm just not going to consume that anymore. And that works. That helps on a private level. That reduces stress massively. That makes your life just a lot better. Because, my wife, who was doing science and didn't even notice that the world was going to end because of the train, 4 days later, when the public realizes, hey, that story was bullshit, and then we're living for fear in 3 days, my wife just didn't notice. So she saved herself all that anxiety and fear. Not that she would have that anxiety and fear, because she is intelligent, and one of the reasons why I've married her and love her dearly is that she's very critically. She thinks very critically. Like, she's one of the scientists who does that correctly. And, she doesn't always agree with me. Far from it, I would say. On political topics, most of the time we do not agree. But, that's how a good relationship works. That you can disagree and you can still love each other. But I mean, that works on a personal level. That is completely acceptable. Astral C says remove all notifications except instant messages and maybe mail. Life is 10 times better. I agree. Like, I install I need to like scroll Twitter regularly for my job, but I installed the Twitter app just so that I don't get notifications. I go there if I need to go there. I go to news sites if I need to figure something out, and that's it. That works great. But that doesn't solve our problem. Because the thing most people don't understand, sadly, is journalism is not like entertainment. Journalists don't produce like a thing that people watch or read or whatever, and then that's that. Journalists actually influence history because, especially these days, but this has been true since Bismarck's time, politicians a lot of the times get their information from the press. I mean, they have scientific advisors, they have other advisors, they have sources, they have intelligence services, all of that. But like, even the government gets their own people in the government, even people running the government get a lot of their information from the press or filtered through, other people, but it comes from the press. So when journalism fails, there's not only the problem that if journalism is shit now, it can't like keep politicians on their toes and fact check them, so to speak. And I always say that because these days fact check is basically the opposite. If somebody terms something a fact check, it's probably bullshit. It's probably straight propaganda. That's what I've noticed. But the press can't do their job. They can't get voters, what they voted for, right? They can't, have check politicians if they're actually doing what they're supposed to do. But that's not even the worst of it. Like, it means that if the press puts out shitty information, the government and politicians and the government use this wrong information to make decisions, and that ends up being horrible. Just one example: when Putin, after 8 years of war in Ukraine, at the end of February, went on full invasion mode, the leaders of the German government, including the foreign minister and the chancellor, the guy who runs the government, said quite openly that they were surprised by what was going on. So the press was surprised. So I can only understand that, everybody's living in their own bubble. They get their information from the press. They had, and we know today, that they had months of warnings of intelligence services, of satellite video images, of tanks, massive tank columns massing, obvious signs that something was going on. So yes, you can on some level no, you can't really be surprised. I mean, how can you be surprised if you're well informed and if you're in that position? How can you be surprised? Like, I don't get it. Like, I don't. You just admitted that your decision making is based on the idiot journalists who have no fucking idea, right? But like they're badly paid. They've got no fucking time, and they don't have any intelligence services. You at least have the fucking intelligence services. So it's the problem here is that journalists really influence what the government does, and if journalism is shit, then journalism provides the backdrop for the societal, like, for discussions of everything, right? If the press as a whole paints a certain situation as being this way, then the public discourse will not deviate from that too much. I mean, they don't have to agree with the press on everything, and there are different opinions in the press. It's all not that easy. But generally, if the information that is provided, which is the job of the press, and of the PR companies, which is the problem, but like the press should provide the good information. If that's also shit information, then our whole society just makes decisions on shit information, right? And sometimes, like in this case, very obvious shit information. Another, to me, for example, relatively obvious example is the predictions of what climate change will cause. It's not like if you look at predictions from 10 years ago, it's obviously that, like, for 10 years in the future, it's obviously that those were wrong. But that's not being reflected in the press, right? So this whole fear mongering always makes everything look the worst, and it warps reality, because journalists don't, like, in a perfect world, even in a perfect world, humans are not humans aren't perfect. So even if the journalists did the best job they could, there'd be reality, and then there's people observing that reality, and then there's journalists taking that and disseminating that to society at large. And even if they did the best job they could, that would still be warped in certain ways. For example, if 80% of all journalists are white male, then all of reality will be warped through that lens, right? So there's always, even if the journalists did a good job and were well funded and could actually do research, like, the picture they would project towards society of reality as they see it wouldn't be perfect. But now they're really shit. So that picture is, like, infinitely worse. It's like fucking, in some cases, just warped beyond recognition. And society that is dependent on making decisions in your daily life, the government, anybody, basically, because they can't, you don't have enough time in your life to just keep every possible aspect of reality under observation. So that's what the press is supposed to do, like, tell you the important things about the facts about the important things, which they're doing incredibly badly. Right? It's like trying to drive a car and somebody's, like, smashed your windscreen to pieces and you can't fucking see anything. It's that's the real problem, and I think that's why there's, yes, you can have and you should have, like, ideas how to solve this for your own sanity, right? And consume less media or consume it differently. I as a journalist, I can only recommend that, to consume less journalistic works, which pains me, but that's the only way I think people can stay sane these days. But beyond that, we need to solve this problem. Like, I don't know how, and I don't know if it will get solved, but I think this is a very important factor in society, because of this fear-based way of doing this job. Society is going to shit. I mean, there's other reasons why society is going to shit, but it's making everything worse. Just making everything worse. Terrestrial Jim says on the comment to the demos, to be fair, there were quite a lot of Nazi, homeopathy, nut jobs, and so on at those demos. But as you say, that cannot mean the opinion of the people that criticize the pandemic measure will not be heard. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I went to a lot of demos when I was a kid, right? And I always went to the 1st of May, like, peace, labor demonstration. And there were always a lot of these fucking black bloc. They were basically just troublemakers, right? They were leftists. It doesn't even matter if they're like right wing or left wing. They were just troublemakers. They just wanted to just start shit with the police. It was always the same, right? And the press didn't report on like this peace demo. If there's a demo and there's like, I don't know, 5,000 people and 4,600 of them are just like peaceful. And then there's 400 idiots. Like, you'd report on the 400 idiots, right? But you'd say, well, this was the peaceful demo. And most people there just were there for a good cause and they did the right way. And then there were some idiots. You can't just go and, they're all idiots. And the press doesn't do that in other situations, right? If there's a football game and some guy throws fireworks, whatever, on the pitch and hits a player in the head and then get injured, like, the press doesn't write articles about how all football fans are just criminals or something like that. It's just like, that's not how it works. And they usually don't do that, and they just do that now because they're trying to silence this group of people, which is, I don't know. It's just too much work, I guess, to actually accept those arguments and it's too complicated. It's too complicated to actually argue with these people. Like, they're just not up to the job, right? They're not up to the job of people who think, yeah, this pandemic is bad, but also maybe, maybe personal freedom and the rights of citizens are also important. Maybe we can agree that both things are important, and then we need to like discuss and come to a compromise or whatever, instead of just blanketly like declaring one side complete nut jobs. And it's never like, the complexity of things is never taken into account here. Like, there's like, yeah, homeopathy nut jobs, right? Sometimes they get even those guys get attacked in the press. But what the press then in the same article never talks about is the fact that the fucking federal health system of our country actually pays for homeopathy. So it's like the state actually endorses it, right? And it would be much more complicated to take that into account and to talk about that, but they don't want to do that. That's too much work, and they got their editor breathing down their neck, and it's all a gray zone. It's not all the journalist's fault. That's what I'm trying to say here. But some stuff is, and there's some, I would even say, pathologies, like the people who consider it possible to be an activist and a journalist at the same time. Like that, I don't like that. That is definitely a problem. And then the whole the way newspapers are run is a problem. Like, why do they have to make massive profits? And why can't people, just audiences, finally understand that they need to pay for things if they want good quality? And really, that our whole society depends on this. Our whole society, to some extent, depends on us figuring out a solution or another. Otherwise, we are gonna go, we're gonna burn. Like, if this shit keeps on going, you have like ludicrous stories like the nuke train, and then some fucking columnist saying, "Oh, let's call Putin's bluff." Whatever. Let's move our own nukes to the border. This is gonna lead to fucking nuclear war at some point. Because, like, it's bad enough that we have one side where they don't have a free press, and the people over there are not informed largely about what's going on, and they're making bad decisions. But now our side, which has a free press, and where people have the ability to inform themselves, like the press basically neuters themselves by fucking, like, the Nazis at least had to fucking, actually the state had to get the press to just, Gleichschaltung, to just march in lockstep and get them all on the same page on everything the state wanted to do, with massive censorship, with like killing people, with driving people out of their jobs, with threatening people. And now we have a situation where on some topics the press is doing this. I look at it and I go like, these people are doing it to themselves. Like they're fucking moving in lockstep on a certain topic, and they don't even like imagine that something else could be true. And the people that read that stuff, man, I was at a stag do over the weekend, talking to some friends I hadn't seen in ages, and they're intelligent people. And on the Ukraine thing, they're just there's just everybody just hook, line, and sinker swallows what the fucking journalists write. And the only thing I do in these situations, I always try very, very carefully to just suggest that maybe not all of that is true. And I always say, what's your job? What are you working at? And then I say, look, think back to some news stories, like in the public broadcasting on TV or in a newspaper, about your job, about your area of expertise, about what you do. And I'll say, isn't that aren't they writing and reporting ludicrous bullshit on this kind of stuff? Where the guy writing the story obviously has no idea what he's talking about, and it doesn't matter what job they have. Everybody says, yeah, sure. I can't read that shit. Just bad. And I'm like, what makes you think that concerning foreign policy in Ukraine, these people know better than those people? And some people, sometimes I get them thinking for a little bit. I don't know if it ever works, but I'm like, just think about that. Anyway, that's it for me on that topic. I'm sorry it's so depressing, but it is an incredibly depressing topic, I think. Speaking of feedback, I've talked about feedback a bit there before, because I think it's very important when you work as a journalist, and I consider this journalistic work because I'm trying to, produce it under the same principles that I would do any other journalistic work. It's very important to listen to your audience, and I don't want to be like those people who are in their own bubble, and I'm in my own bubbles. And even though I know that, I need other people who disagree with me to tell me, and I need to argue with them about that. And so I call on you to keep me on my toes. Please go to privatecitizen.press and send me some feedback. As I said the previous episodes, I won't talk about any feedback in this episode. I'm still working on a feedback episode or maybe two, and I kind of want to do that. I kind of want to do one of those again. So please keep the feedback coming. I'll talk about it if you send me some stuff, or if it's not for the show, you can still send me feedback, and I'll just talk to you. Send you an email or whatever. Talk about things, discuss things. I think that is very helpful and healthy. And with that, I need to talk about the other thing you need to do to save journalism. You need to start paying for this shit. No, you don't, actually. Actually, you don't. Because I think, actually, if you're listening to this, you're not part of the problem. You're at least willing to think about things yourself, which is the whole point of the show. But I'm still kind of in the same problem as any other journalist. I need to kind of make money, and it's not easy, and it's gotten a lot harder recently with, everything being 3 times the price it was before. And I realize it's my profession's fault, which I just elaborated. But I'm kind of trying my best to fight against that. So if you want to help, you can do so. There's a section in the show notes, Private Citizen or Press, called Toss a Coin to Your Podcast, and has all the details. I'm not going to go deeper into that for today. I've kept you here long enough. I just want to thank everybody who's been helping out. So thanks Galtaran, Rodane the Insane, Steve Hose, Butterbeans, Michael Small, 1i11G, or Illik, sometimes, Lilk, Jonathan M. Hitai, Michael Mullen Jensen, Jaroslav Lichtblau, Dave, Jackie Plage, Sandman616, IKN, Bennett Piata, Rizal, Avis, Joe Poser, Dirk Didi, Fadi Mansour, Kai Sears, David Potter, Mika, Cam, Mr. Amish, Indie Gamiacs, Robert Forster, Captain Eckhead, RJ Tracy, Crunkle, Rick Bragg, Ricky M, Barry Williams, Jonathan, Astral C, was in chat earlier, Superuser D, and Florian Pigorsch. And also thanks to my Twitch subscribers, because, doing this live on Twitch and had some great feedback today, which makes me even sadder that I couldn't do the show last week live, because I love this. I love, getting a bit of a live feedback about what I'm doing. So thanks to Mike the Dane, Bacon the Pork, Redeemer F, Galtaran, Jonathan4747, El Terrestrious Jim, who was also in chat discussing there, and MTE Sorrow. And I'm also thankful to Bytemark at bytemark.co.uk, British cloud hosting company, who provide the servers that enable me to send you the audio files. They provide the bandwidth and the storage free of charge, and it's the only reason I can still do the show. And that's why I like Bytemark. I'm not a fan of sponsoring and being beholden to companies, but it isn't a perfect world, and they're kind of saving my ass here every week. So thanks to Bytemark, and they seem to be good people. It's not like they ever complained about anything, which, that's when I would pull the plug, go, I need to, put things where I have control. Well, I have control, but I obviously need more control. But it's working, and they're good people. They're doing good thing for free speech and everything. So Bytemark, check them out if you need some cloud hosting. And that's it for the show. I'll be back next week. If everything goes according to plan, I'll be on the road or on a plane, actually, for a bit in between. But that shouldn't concern you, really. I should be back next Wednesday. There are some strikes right now, so who the hell knows? But, fingers crossed. And, theme song for the show, of course, Acoustic Roots by Raoul Kabazali. And I'm going to play you out with a song called Bayou Moon. I can't pronounce things today, I'm sorry. Bayou Moon by the Wesley Cousins Band featuring Billy Valentine, which is a great song and just lovely. So I'm going to leave you with that. Aim to misbehave, especially if you work in journalism. Actually, for all the journalists out there, Jesus Christ, I need to quit the show. But before I do that, and before I play the song, I'm going to play the speech again by Malcolm Reynolds from the film Serenity, written by the great Joss Whedon. And this is something every journalist should also take to heart. Maybe print it out and put it over your desk.
I aim to misbehave.
Oh, that wasn't the whole speech. That's not good. I kind of need to fix that in post, I guess. Do I have it now? I want to play it, though. Why don't I have the full speech? It's got to be somewhere. Let me check something. Let me go in here into my secret folders. There's gotta be gotta be the sound. There's gotta be somewhat. Sorry for this. I'm gonna have to wait. Let me set a cue point here. I'm gonna have to fix a lot in post today. It's not good. Think that is it. So let's play that now.
This report is maybe 12 years old. Parliament buried it, and it stayed buried until a river dug it up. This is what they feared she knew. And they were right to fear. Because there's a whole universe of folk who are going to know it too. They're going to see it. Somebody has to speak for these people. Y'all got on this boat for different reasons, but y'all come to the same place. So now I'm asking more of you than I have before. Maybe all. As sure as I know anything, I know this. They will try again. Maybe on another world, maybe on this very ground swept clean. A year from now, 10, they'll swing back to the belief that they can make people better. And I do not hold to that. So no more running. I aim to misbehave.
All right, let's hit save on that. So today is Fab Hates the Current State of Journalism, part 11, part number maybe higher. Yeah, part number is probably a lot higher. Fucking journalism, man. Why did I get into this shit? Why do I hate myself? What's he looking at? What ship's he looking at? It's not Bismarck. Is that Kearsarge? Yeah, so I'm gonna rate Stats Bloke now. I was playing World of Warships. He's a great guy. He's a British dude. Just discovered him recently. I've been trying to play World of Warships, and he's a very helpful man who is very scientific about things, about video games, which is a change. Very nice channel as well. So I'm gonna rate him, and I'm out of here because I will have to do a hell of a lot of post on this. As I mentioned before. So thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it very much. As always, see you soon. I don't know when I'll be streaming next. Probably next podcast. I got some issues right now with extra time. It's just still a lot going on. But I appreciate you being here. And I hope I'll see you soon. So have a nice evening and say hello to Stats Bloke for me. Goodbye.